over and over, that's the commitment we come back to. We come back, whether we're an educator, a practitioner, a student, or whatever, we come back to what's our ground? Where's the place when we get quiet that we're committed to moving forward to in our life? And for whatever reason, the people that have chosen this place, they find that. And it was always incredible to watch the students proceed through adversity, to watch the faculty proceed through the adversities they face, from students and administration, to watch administrators that face adversity, from regulators and students to the regulators that face, everyone just kept at it.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. It was here at the end of August that I launched the first episode of Geological. It was an experiment to see if practitioners of East Asian medicine would find a show that went deep and geeky into the curious workings of our trade to be of interest. 7 years and 370 episodes later, it seems like the answer is yes. What keeps me motivated to publish an episode a week when I already have a practice that keeps me as busy as I want to be? In some ways, it's the momentum of what's come before. Do something long enough and it builds up a head of steam. It kind of has a life of its own, and in part, there are the expectations that a new conversation will reliably land in your podcast feed every Tuesday. So that adds a feeling of responsibility. I don't like to disappoint people, and I've heard from enough folks over the years that they rely on Geological to accompany them on their commute, and there are the students who have told me that the podcast helps to motivate them through their studies so they can follow their passion and vision for practicing acupuncture as a livelihood. But mostly, there's this. 30 years ago, I began to get curious about just what is going on that my mind, spirit, and body could be so affected by a few well-placed needles. The question of how does this stuff work? It started me on a path of trying to understand how acupuncture works. You'd think that after all this time, I'd have a good answer to that question. But it is still the question that I continually ask. Geological? It allows me to continue with that inquiry. Perhaps if I was a master of the art, I wouldn't have the motivation to continue with the inquiry. Perhaps at some point, I'll feel contented with what I know and can close the chapter of actively engaging with learning. But what I've found so far is that the more I learn about acupuncture, the curiouser I become. When I first started out, I thought acupuncture was strange, and as time's gone on, it's not gotten any less strange. If anything, I've had to come to terms with acupuncture as something that's weird, and that's not a bug, it's a feature. I'm deeply grateful to all the people who have generously made the time to sit down with me for an unscripted conversation. Here's something I know about acupuncturists. We like to look smart and put together in public. We are rough on our colleagues who we think don't know or ask what we consider to be stupid questions. We have a fetish with, air quotes here, getting it right in the clinic. In part because so many people who come to see us have been through other practitioners who got it wrong. We don't want our name added to that list. So I've nothing but appreciation for the people who join me for a geological conversation, knowing that we don't know where a conversation might go, and are willing to share both what they know and what they don't. And thanks to all of you who listen to Geological, who find some kind of nourishment and connection through it. And especially to all of you who support the podcast in a material way with your membership or contribution. I couldn't do this without your support, nor could I do it without the support of the sponsors who help to fund so much of what happens behind the scenes here in the Qiological Sound and Motion Laboratory. Here, on this anniversary moment of Qiological, I would love to hear from you. I'd really appreciate if you would take a minute, maybe 3, and share your thoughts with me. I'm curious to know, what does Qiological mean to you? How has a particular conversation perhaps changed the course of what you do? What keeps you coming back and looking for the latest episode in your podcast feed? Have you heard things here that you've disagreed with? What would you miss most if Qiological wasn't here? And if you were to describe Qiological in one word, what's the word? Here at the beginning of the 8th year of Qiological, I'd love it if you would take a moment and let me know what Qiological means to you. Because at the end of the day, without you, there's no Qiological. I'd love to hear from you. Today is another anniversary moment. Last year, the entire month of August was dedicated to doing a series of conversations with people who were there in the early days of acupuncture's emergence into mainstream culture in the USA. That theme is something I've been carrying forward, with the last conversation of each month being dedicated to looking at some of the influences at play and how the foundation of our profession came together before there really was a profession like we know it today. Today's guest, Paul Karsten. Paul was involved with curriculum development and educational standards. He held key positions at a number of different schools, including helping to found what back then was the Seattle Institute of Oriental Medicine, which was the gateway that I walked through. We get into this in a moment, but first, a tip of the hat to the sponsors who make it possible for you to enjoy Qiological. Stay with us. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear-Don't-Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lyle, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com. and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AccuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit AccuFastNeedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Paul Karsten, welcome to Geological.
Good to see you. Good to be here, Michael.
Nice to have you back. We've had you on before. It was quite a while ago. Today, we're here for a little history talk. I got this sort of burr under my saddle a little while back. Got curious about, I'm going to call it the recent history of Chinese medicine. Actually, I'm going to call it the emergence of Chinese medicine into what I'm going to call mainstream Western culture. We'll just put a context on that. And, I was lucky when I came into the trade because there were schools, there's a path to licensure. You could have a profession. But there's a bunch of folks, and you're one of them. Back when you started, there wasn't a profession. It was a whole different thing. And so I want to turn the Wayback Machine back to when you first heard about acupuncture. I'd like to know what was going on, partly in your life, that something like this would land and catch your interest, and partly what was going on in the world. What was happening around you? What were the problems as a young man that you were looking at and going, good God, what am I going to do about this? What was going on in those moments when acupuncture first hit your consciousness? And paint us a picture.
Well, let me turn it around just for a second, Michael. What is your definition of history? What do you think history is?
Well, that's a great question. Man, this is why it was fun to have you as a teacher in acupuncture school. So when I think of history, I think in Chinese medicine, we in a way fetishize our history. Oh, we're connected to this great stream of practice and thought and philosophy, and it goes back thousands of years, and we can trace it back to China. So all these doctors from the past. So, we kind of dig history in Chinese medicine. We lean on it. I think we all have some kind of story about the history of Chinese medicine and where we stand in that, how we imbibe that influence, what kind of streams we're a part of. Again, I'm interested in, there's a moment that seemed to happen in the West where this stuff came out of the Chinese and Asian communities, really started hitting the mainstream, and something happened. And so that's what I'm curious about. So when I say history, what I'm really curious about is, like, you as a young man, you're just going about your life, trying to figure yourself out. I guess most of us were trying to figure out the world. What am I doing here? And somehow acupuncture came along. So I'm curious to know the context of all that.
Okay. And I'm getting a little ahead, but I also have another question for you. What is your definition of profession?
Okay, well, we'll get into that a little bit later.
Very good. Okay. We'll start with the stories then. So first off,
I love starting with stories.
History to me is pretty much stories. I mean, my graduate training in UW was in medical history and medical ethics and medical education. And the study of it certainly demonstrated, as well as living through it with the birth of our, quote, profession, demonstrated how much of it is just BS. It's just stories that people make up later on to fit their ideas about reality. And rarely can you know exactly what truth is, but you can have a bunch of stories, and you can have a bunch of stories from different perspectives to make it be alive.
That's right.
But I just want to caution, since a lot of the histories that I've seen written, either in articles or books, have been from a particular bias. And so they aren't truly history, even though they act as if it's factual. So you're going to get my perspective. Hopefully you'll get some other interesting perspectives. But let's start from the beginning, that none of them maybe can be called truth in the sense of history as it actually being real. Fair enough?
I am 100% with you.
Okay.
Are you familiar with Studs Terkel? Do you know who Studs Terkel was?
Barely.
Okay, so he was this like radio guy, and he did a lot of interviews with people, kind of like me. He's kind of in my pantheon of influences at the moment, and it very much the same thing. Because history, like, well, who's writing the damn history? And of course, they got a bias, and they probably have an axe to grind too. Being human beings, we usually do. So yes, very much, and why I've invited you to this, I've been talking to lots of people that were there. I'm going to call it the early days. There weren't really schools, or they were just beginning. Licensure was maybe a thing in a few states. Insurance probably didn't cover it. I mean, it looked the landscape was very different. And so that's the main thing I'm interested in, Paul, is your experience.
Okay, great. All right. And I would say I'm kind of a mid-generation. I bridged between the old, who had nothing in terms of structures, to later on when there were a lot of structures. And I was in the midst of the forming of those structures. So I was witnessing from the inside the people, including myself, that were participating in creating the various things and how we made decisions. And that's fascinating. However, let me return to your initial question. Thanks for taking mine. I was in Zen monastic training, and I wanted to be able to go back to the monastery and provide support for people seeking clarity and understanding and well-being. So my goal to go into acupuncture school was not to get rid of pain. It was not to make money. It was not to have a private career or to deal with illness particularly. It was to assist people in finding clarity in their own life through the use of various herbal, food, acupuncture, and so forth. So that was my initial drive to go to acupuncture school. And it just so happened at the time that there was an acupuncture college that had been formed in Los Angeles by an old Chinese general who had fought communism, ended up in Taiwan, and then came over here, and he was also a physician. His name was Homer Chang. Wonderful old general.
Homer Chang?
Homer Chang, C-H-E-N.
Homer.
Homer, yeah, Homer. And so by that time, he
like Homer Simpson, the Homer.
Yeah, you could make some relationship to that. He had a little school on Alvarado Street in L.A. called Samra that he named Sino-American Medical Rehabilitation Association, if you caught all that. And his vision was to somehow integrate Eastern and Western and bring it to America, because he was a Western physician himself in China, in addition to being a general. And so when I went and visited that school, he was the one that met me at the door. You know, back then, schools, the presidents often met people at the door. And we hit it off, and I started school. And you know, along the way, life doesn't feed you where you thought you were going all the time. So I ended up getting involved in the program and realizing the curriculum sucked. And from the point of view of organization, we had incredible teachers. We had a Korean teacher who was responsible for a lot of the 5-element stuff in Korea. We had a Japanese shiatsu acupuncture instructor who taught mainly by diagnosis by touch. We had some traditional Chinese medicine folks that read by the book, essentially. We had some Vietnamese and some Taiwanese. So it was a really intriguing gathering of individuals that he collected, but they overlapped and left gaps in the curriculum when we were in it. And there were a lot of translations and so forth. So as students, we grappled with a lot of confusion because no one really knew how to do an education in terms of organizing it. And we had to get together and study and research a lot on our own and figure out how to do the clinic, the classes, the homework, prepare for tests, and so forth. But that challenge.
Paul, you make that sound like wait a minute. You make that sound like that's a bad thing.
Well, at the time, everyone felt that way because it was Americans expect organization. They expect the curriculum to go step by step. They don't expect the same teachers to teach the same thing and then miss whole other chunks, et cetera, et cetera. There was a sense of people wanting more order in their life. And this was really confusing. It was wonderful if you just took individual teachers and found the jewels. You would listen to 2 hours of translation and maybe 5 minutes of it you'd find is valuable. If you could do that, then it was great. But it had a lot of times where people got really frustrated. And you went through school, sometimes you got frustrated. So, there was.
Yeah, I almost blew out about 4 weeks in.
So, in any case, towards the end, I wrote up a proposal when I was getting out of school on how they could revamp the whole thing. And I took it to Homer and I said, look, wonderful teachers, but no one knows how to coordinate things. Here's a proposal. And he hired me.
It's so funny, isn't it? Sometimes, like, you got an idea. I see a possibility. I might be able to help here. And you get an idea and you put it down, on paper like you did. And Homer looks at it and goes, yeah, I've been looking for a guy like you.
Yeah, whatever it was.
What I want to know also, I mean, we're gonna move forward with this, but why acupuncture? You're in the monastery. You want to be able to help people, but why acupuncture? I mean, why not massage? Why not Western medicine? Why not Western herbalism? Why not chiropractic? There's a ton of ways of helping people. Why acupuncture? What?
It's a good question. In my situation, it's probably fairly simple. For over a decade, I've been fascinated by everything from Asia. So the studies, the practices I've done in terms of art, in terms of music, in terms of poetry, in terms of history, in terms of culture, it all been about China and Japan and such. And so obviously I ended up in Zen because it resonated with me as a way of discovering reality, of insight that was similar to what I had found as a kid when I wandered around in the woods. So there was a resonance there that struck. And when I was there, obviously I heard about acupuncture. I heard about Chinese medicine. My teacher got acupuncture. I went and got acupuncture. And so I became familiar with the discipline. The other piece is, I think it is it's the most amazing thing, Michael, what we do. I don't know the depth of how much people don't appreciate it. One, compared to Western medicine, as you know, the side effects are tiny. You can feel a lot more like you're either going to help people or not help them, but you don't have to worry about giving them drugs that will cause, all kinds of side effects later on in terms of their liver or kidney. Two, you have to directly touch and connect with people with your own chi, with your own source, with your own being. And to practice that, I mean, Zen was all about sitting in meditation and doing that, but you're not having, what's that, pedal meets the tire meets the road or something like that. You don't have to actually do it, manifest it in the same way that when you walk into a patient room, you have to clear everything out. You have to be present. You have to be grounded. You have to touch with a feeling of well-being and insert needles and, the whole thing. I'm talking to the choir, but that whole experience is a training tool for the practitioner to get more in connection with the present, with chi, with well-being. And so for me, from the get-go, I recognized that this was a discipline, given my background in Zen, that could be profoundly helpful, not only to patients, but to practitioners, to help them gain a deeper sense of self and reality and all that sort of thing. So that's a treasure that I think we don't speak to as much, how valuable it is for the people who daily practice an intention of connection with other human beings that require presence. It's not, you can't fake people out on that too much. I mean, there's a lot of fakery going on in this profession, but that's a different story.
Well, there's a lot of fakery going on in the human enterprise. There's that. But yes, we are human. But I get your point. Having a practice doesn't mean you'll get it, but you've got the opportunity to bring yourself present. You've got the opportunity to sit quietly in the midst of all kinds of stuff. Anyone can sit quietly in a monastery. Well, not anyone can sit quietly in a monastery. It's easier maybe to sit quietly in a monastery, but it's a little harder to sit quietly when some guy in a baseball hat that you don't like walks in the door and asks you for help.
Yeah. So when I think of the treasure of the history and of what I call the profession, I'm going to jump on you here to give you my definition of profession. It's that moment that we engage in when we insert this sharp piece of steel into someone. That relationship is, to me, where profession is and where history is. That is the magic of acupuncture. And all the other crap in terms of the politics and the gossip and the rumors and the belief systems and so forth is our human stuff. But the bodies know. When bodies touch, they have a depth of connection that is profound, even if our minds are arrogant and filled with belief systems about how special we are or our own diagnosis or whatever. That still doesn't really, this is where it counts. And so that is a true treasure, and I am blessed with having been within this profession and seeing people go with it. So that was why I started. And then along the way, I moved from being involved with going back to the Zen monastery to becoming an educational reform person and developer within the profession. A year after I reformed the curriculum at this first school, Homer, bless his heart, died of cancer. He was a real sweetheart, but he was an old man. And once that happened, there was a change of the guard, and the change of the guard also thought maybe they needed a change in terms of not having this young white guy, having too much to say about the curriculum. But then another Korean gentleman stepped forward and say, look, I have a blank sheet here. You can hire the faculty, make the curriculum, do the whole thing. Come to my school. And at that time, I was also at a meeting, and this is the history piece.
And what year is this, roughly?
This is 82.
82? Okay.
So that's why I'm like a bridge person. But there was a meeting because I was the representative at that point. There was a collection of people that met in our school to just talk about the possibility of having organizations. And I remember it was at that meeting the decision was made to start the certifying commission, the council of colleges, the accrediting body, and the whatever the fourth one is that I just slipped my mind. But those four, it's a group, and I was just the infant at that point. But that was the starting point that led to the birth of all these other organizations. And then I got on all those commissions and such and worked within that. But the bottom line was I had this interest in figuring out how we could train Americans in the experiential aspect of feeling qi and the terminology in Chinese medicine, and not just seeing it as an intellectual, rational endeavor, which is what most of their training in America had been about. And so the Zen piece really helped me have a little bit different perspective on how one could go about that. And so that pretty much became the thread, whether I was national politics or whether I was locally consulting with schools.
Now, you talked about there was this moment in 1982 where these four, I'm going to call them the four pillars. In a way, it was the four pillars of the profession, right? There was like the accreditation for schools. There was the NCCAOM, national accreditation. There's some other stuff. I don't remember all of them either.
AAOM, the professional member organization.
Mm-hmm.
The Sangha.
The Sangha. how did how did this happen? How did people come together? What were the conversations? Was there one person in particular who was like, we got to do this, or was there some kind of group thing that emerged? What happened? Were you guys sitting around drinking beers? What happened?
Yeah, and I was right in the cusp of coming into that. So I can't, and a lot of the people that were involved with this had, years of experience starting schools or whatever. So I can't speak to.
Yeah, well, at that point, years of experience was like 4 or 5 years.
I mean, but some of them were, elder statesmen in terms of being practitioners that then started schools. So they had a lot more processes going on over the history to think about how to do things. I wouldn't say at that point, though, when I went to that meeting, that there was any one leader. It was more everyone realized if we're going to survive, and one thing we all have shared, be we student, teacher, regulator, whatever, is determination to keep going. And they wanted to keep going. If we're going to survive, we have to form the structures that can assist us in doing that. And medical history points in almost any medical endeavor to these sort of structures needing to be present. If you read Paul Starr's Social Transformation of American Medicine, which really 100 years ago describes the history of Western medicine, it's just like you're reading what happened in our medicine, but it was biomedicine being the little creatures that had to find a place and build their own organizational structure. So it's natural to have exams. It's natural to have a council of educators. It's natural to have a membership organization. And within America, higher education, you've got to have accreditation or you don't get financial aid, so you die. So everyone recognized these four as being critical. And so there was, I wouldn't say a lot of disagreement about creating them. There got to be a lot of disagreement about exactly what their policy and procedures should be. And that's where the history got interesting. And that's where I was right in the middle of it.
What were the disagreements around? What were the factions? Usually when there's factions, it's a couple of people that have a good idea, or at least a strong idea. And what were the different aspects that were being debated at that point?
Yeah. So belief systems, gossip, preformed opinions with judgments without evidence, all this were rampantly prevalent, because, again, most of us didn't have a real clue what was going on or where we're going. And so anyone who had a strong thought or idea often got their way just because they were the star in the void of the abyss of space. So, but the intriguing two forces that were really prevalent in the early 80s were, one, the question of prerequisites, the question of the numbers of years of college and how long the training had to be, how long the clinical training had to be, what the standards for curriculum would be. In other words, once you form organizations, there becomes this desire for standardization. That was another battle, standardization versus non-standardization, and what the standards ought to be. And so the most pivotal meeting in the first 5 or 6 years was one in Chicago. And I don't know the date of it, but it was about 84, I would say, 84, I'm going to guess. And that was really one of the most magical moments in the history of the organizations of our profession that allowed it to go forward. You had people walking into that meeting in Chicago. They would go to fancy hotels, like everyone thinks they have to go to conventions and fancy hotels. And everyone had a different opinion. Do you need no college, 1 year, 2 years, a degree? Do you need 3 years of training, 2 years of training? Everyone was just battling and going bonkers over it. So there was a lot of ego, different states, different cultures, all that sort of stuff. And everyone's pushing their different positions. And so you needed to have something that could bring everyone to the common core and find agreement there. And they were fortunate to have, at that point in time, a leader who wasn't an acupuncturist at all. He's a Georgetown lawyer, and his name was Sherman Cohen. And he became the first chair of the accrediting body as well that led that, because he had more higher education background, and he had the the patches that people would look at and go, oh, he knows what he's doing.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. He's a lawyer. He's a lawyer, for God's sake. Now, what was his interest? How did he show up there?
Well, Caballot, I don't know. But
He's like Mr. Gonçal. Like, where'd he come from?
yeah, I know he had relationships with a particular school that was in his neighborhood. And my guess is, and this is a part of the personal story that I didn't inquire into, he was either a patient, because that was often the relationship that involved outside people coming in, or some form of a colleague or friend from otherwise, But I don't know specifically in this case. What I do know is that he sat us down in this meeting, and instead of going for all the different ideas, he went for, where are we the same? What is the lowest common denominator, in a sense? I don't know that he used that word.
How are we connected?
Where is it that we can find a meeting place that we can all accept at this point in time? And at first it was a little bit, no, we got to have doctoral degree. We got to have this. We don't have that, blah, blah, blah. And if we do too many years of college, no students will come and my school will close down. And it's like it. But then as it settled in, and this was one meeting, like 2 hours long, and I actually stood up and argued against it because I was afraid of standardization. I was afraid if accreditation came in, it would standardize our programs and everyone would lose their uniqueness. And so I was a voice of this, but the voice of getting financial aid was the real power in the room, even though it wasn't spoken out loud very much. But that was what everyone was talking about. We have to get government approval for financial aid. And that driving force, along with his keeping us focused, brought us to this common spot of agreement for 2 years of college. I think it was 2 or 3 years of training and so many hours. I mean, it's basically the framework for what was called a master's degree, because people didn't feel it was enough for a doctorate, but it was more than and then it became the role of the council and the colleges to fill out the details of what that would be. But they came to agreement on that structure, which was the first time ever. And without that agreement, you wouldn't have had the standards moving to state laws, to the national certifying exam, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe that would have all been better to have just not had the standard, but it was what allowed us to move forward in what I think you're defining as a profession.
Well, what I'm hearing is there was a cohesion that arose in that moment. There was a place of agreement that, look, you put, acupuncturists are like Jews, right? You put 10 in a room, you got 12 opinions.
Yeah.
Right? So to be able to bring disparate points of view together and find, hey, actually, here's where we agree. I may not agree with everything, but I agree enough that we can work together, because together, now y'all can make something, right? But separately, and I'm with you, I don't like standards. I'm a little bit of an anarchist that way. I'm not crazy about standards, but I get the need for them, because man, if you're going to the hardware store, you want to make sure that the nut you buy is going to fit on the bolt that you got at home. So there's a place for it.
Yeah. And it was maybe a decade later that we started facing the crisis of standards, where schools didn't had a vision but thought they had to meet a standard written by the commission. They felt like they had to change their dream and curriculum and vision to match the standard in order to get accreditation. And it was at that point that I gained a different role of going and saying, you can meet the standard by language. You can fake it out to meet the standard and still do what you really want to do if you are clear, because it was in the mission of the Accreditation Commission to support innovative places of education. And even though you had people in the Accreditation Commission who were prejudiced against such innovation, once you put it in their face with outcomes, it worked. So you just needed someone to help guide. So there were like 15 colleges that I got involved with, who of all ilks, that were grappling with how to face standards and finding a way to keep their uniqueness and at the same time meet the standard. But to switch to the other main feature that was going on back then was this battle of philosophy. At least it was publicly battle of philosophy. I've often found that behind the scenes, these are often just individuals that don't like each other, but they make it sound like it's philosophical. But in this case, it had to do with this 5-element TCM boondoggle vocabulary that you still hear up in echoes of it today, where, which is better or they require different kinds of training. And it wasn't 5 elements. It was actually a particular brand of 5 elements. And you're probably familiar with this. Worsley 5 elements dictated a specific way of using that therapy and using that theory. And the teacher himself said, if you don't do it my way, you're out of our system. You're blackballed from being a teacher or a student with me if you don't do it the way that I said. So you either had people that were completely faithful or not. And then you had the TCM people who were giggling because they said, oh, that 5-element stuff, that's not even clinical. That's just rubbish. But why do you have to fight about such silly things? But they were going to state legal places to argue what the law should be because they had different requirements. The national exam, they're fighting over what the test questions would be. In the curriculum stage in the council, they're fighting over what the curriculum should be. So for years there, it was really bogging down.
Yeah. Well, look, if you're going to have standards and you need them to a certain degree to be, I'm going to call it a viable entity or profession, in the modern world, as it happens to be at this moment in time. And yeah, for sure, what's going to be on the test exam? Because if you're teaching something and none of that's going to be on the exam, you got to learn something else. Ooh, that's a bit of a problem. So like, whose standard?
Yeah. So that was the first that was a big battle in the 80s, because you can tell that schools, the teachers, the students that had been on one side or the other, they didn't want to, and it was a serious problem. You still see 5-element schools that will teach to the exam course on TCM because they don't teach it in their school, because they adhere to the principle of their founder of that particular tradition that they will not teach any of that, but they do a specific course for tests. So this really, I remember I was on the commission at that point. I'd been elected to the accrediting body, and there was one of the most influential people in the profession at that time. I think he was the person that got Sherman to be part of this group back in Maryland. And he had been a real force for getting things the way he wanted, because he thought them through ahead of time. And he brought them to these meetings when other people weren't thinking, and he gave a very rational approach, and people would vote his stuff in. I watched him. I learned. I was the youngster, but he had this idea. We were trying.
He was prepared.
He was prepared, and we were debating.
He knew what he was doing.
This commission, this is about.
The guy was a damn general.
Yeah. He was the president of a college, and he was good at it. I wasn't good. I'm Peter's principle. I rose up I just wanted to do curriculum. I didn't want any of that. I suck at leadership. So in any case. we were in this back door. I don't know this. No, this story's, I've never reported this story, but it came down to what should be the clinical requirements for the schools. What should be the minimum clinical requirements? And God bless his soul, he believed firmly. And now I'm not so sure that I have more doubts about whether or not he was. Back then I was young and thought, oh no, he's wrong. That you needed to have, you get 10 different patients that you treated, and for whatever number of treatments that was, and that would be sufficient for clinical practice.
10 patients.
10 patients total, 10 different patients. And you treat them more often, whatever it takes they need, but that was sufficient to demonstrate you knew clinic. And I said, no. You need 50 or 100, and you need 250 to 300 hours of clinic minimum. I mean, you have to have sufficient breadth of clinic, blah, 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 blah. I was talking blah, 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 blah. What do I know? I've just been out for 2 years, but that's the point. We are often talking out our ass but maybe our intuition and maybe we made sense.
Well, maybe out of your ass, maybe out of your intuition, but here's what I'm hearing from you. And as you're describing these other people, everybody talked out of their passion. They had an idea and they were showing up with it, damn it.
Yeah. So we had this fierce debate in the commission. Most of the other people weren't, and I came prepared. So that was because I'd learned that from him. And,
how did you prepare? What did you do to prepare for that?
You just think through the logic of your arguments. You just had to think it through a bit ahead of time. That's all. When you haven't thought through something, and what are the reasons why you'd need to see 100 patients versus 10? You could figure out explanations for that, Michael. If I gave you that, you could come back next week and give me an answer that probably was the kind I gave to ACOM. And
I could give you an explanation for why you need to see 100. I could not give you an explanation for why you'd only need to see 10.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I could maybe do it as an academic, debate point. Like, okay, your job is to argue 10 people. I could probably come up with something. Yeah, I probably could, but yeah. Okay. All right. Anyway.
Yeah. So I think, at this point, I am not so certain because the one strength of many, I know many, I have colleagues that are trained in that system. I later on consulted with 2 or 3 colleges in that system to help them fulfill their own mission. I didn't care that they were, all right, this is what you want to do. Let's see how you can effectively do it and get accredited. And rapport with their patients was one of the most profound things that came out of that training. Now, some people could say rapport was attachment or what, there are a lot of, you can spin that so many different ways, what rapport is or isn't. But it was really a remarkable, and I met and interviewed patients as part of working with their schools that really felt transformed from the experience. And so maybe it's not numbers that make the difference in that. But the point was, at that time, I believed it was numbers that was very important. And the other members of the commission sided with me on that one. And so the requirement that you have in ACOM right now for clinical came out of that moment.
And you were prepared. You thought it through.
Yep. So that was one of those like little pivotal moments when I was thinking about this invitation from you. I was going, what are the grand pivotal moments and the little pivotal moments? And there were a series of them, but in that regard, regarding that particular struggle that was going on of philosophies, which I disagreed with completely. I felt like they should be able to find a way to get along here. I mean, 5 elements and 8 principles. Why are you subjecting one is spiritual and one isn't, or one is ticky-tacky and the other's clinical? I mean, it's all, you can see where the origins of SIOM were starting to come from. In any case, that mellowed with time because as the generations grew up, I think from the initial people that founded things, the strength of the emotion and passion settled down too. So you often see that the way the profession has actually moved forward has been when those moments of transferring of power have change, where generations have moved on and they didn't have the histories before. For example, in the 90s, moving on to the biggest battle our profession ever faced that almost killed it. And that was
the 90s.
Yeah, that was when there was a split of the professional organization. Up until that time, the AAAOM had been a fairly healthy membership organization. The states all had their own associations. They would elect representatives, go to the national meeting. Those elected representatives would elect a national board. And there was a lot of activity going on in terms of legal stuff. There was a lot of, it was a really diverse and intriguing group of people in the 80s, really quite something. And I got elected to that board.
And what was the purpose of the membership? What was the purpose of this group?
Well, the purpose of membership.
The membership group.
Generally speaking, the purpose of membership organizations is to support the members. And supporting the members meaning getting laws, getting insurance, getting FDA approval, all those sorts of things that provide more access to practitioners, insurance payments. So having various forces and also continuing education. A lot of the continuing education started at these meetings where they would have little vignettes of models. They bring guest speakers and they talk. And then they'd have all the booth people with all the different selling things as well. So it was a convergence where you got to meet people from all over the country that were practitioners as well as you, and grapple with how do we deal with this state because the state law isn't there, or how do we get insurance or the FDA to approve us, blah, 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 blah. That sort of stuff largely came under the membership organization. But in the 90s, there was a intrigue. So you may remember, do you remember the Alliance?
I came in like 94 or 95.
So
I think I just missed it.
Well, there was this big,
and I was a student anyway, so I didn't care because I was just trying to learn the damn medicine.
So I'll be succinct then. There was a split that occurred between the AAAOM and what became called the Alliance. The AAAOM became a force for we need to be OMDs. The Alliance became a force for we are an umbrella group that shares with all the different specialties of acupuncture, including acupuncture detox and so forth. And they were rabidly opposed to each other. And before, the AAAM wasn't more of an umbrella organization, but there was this one meeting where we were electing board members, and a board member was elected that was the personal enemy of, they had a history going back that I don't even know if it was romantic. I don't know what it was originally, but this is the idea where two people who had a history of relationship that had nothing to do with acupuncture and hated each other's guts. And so when one got elected, the other immediately stepped down, and then the other organization was formed. So the organization was formed, it was painted in philosophy, but if you were there and knew the people, you know that along with that, there was this incredible interpersonal stuff going on. And that's the kind of thing that was witnessed, that I saw happen all the time. It'd be painted later on as a philosophical shift or this or that, but often just came down to the relationships between people that either built something up that didn't need to be built or tore something down that didn't need to be torn down. So it was often sad, but as you said earlier, that's part of what humanity is about.
It's kind of the way we roll a lot of the time.
Daniel Altshuler, he recommended a book to me years ago called Sapiens. You ever heard of the book or whatever? It was.
I have heard of it. I've yet to read it.
So I tried reading it because, Daniel, okay, I respect the guy. And I didn't get through the book, but a major premise of the book was the reason Homo sapiens survived and killed off all the other versions of homos in the planet at the time was they were profoundly good at gossip. Think about that.
Profoundly good at gossip. No, that fits.
Yeah. Imagination, group consciousness, forward thinking, power, all that gossip is what, in a lot of ways, I watched drive who got elected, who didn't get elected, which decisions were made. It was the misinformation or information that was moved around in order to do things. So in some respects, I saw that at the school level. I saw that at the diagnosis level in clinic. I saw that at the organizational level. That on one hand, I was often depressed about it because I didn't know how to deal with God. I didn't know when there was a point, I'm jumping, Michael, you can rein me in, but there was a point where this organization invited me to participate in an online conversation with them. And I jumped on board. I said, hi, I'm here and immediately 30 people in that group slammed me for being some dirty old white man that owned a school. And all I wanted to do was have money. And I didn't respect the students at all. And they didn't know who I was or what school I was with or anything. But that kind of feeling was prevalent, prejudice on all sides. There would be site visitors who were prejudiced against Chinese presidents or others that were prejudiced against for-profit schools because they're only in it for money. Chinese, they don't know anything about higher ed. Or, all sides, the Koreans, blah, 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 blah. So you would just hear this every kind of way, people spinning. And that part of all this just, I didn't know how to handle it, frankly. So I just stayed quiet.
Yeah. It's
most of the time.
Many of us don't. It's tough to be a human. But at the same time, Paul, this is where standards and a structure are really helpful, because are we going to have our differences? Damn right we're going to have our differences. Good luck not having them, okay? Given that we are like this as humans, some kind of baseline, some kind of structure, some kind of, I'm going to call it rules of engagement, so we can, in some agreeable civil way, coming back to that idea that there's a place where we agree, a common denominator, work with that. Come back to that somehow, home back to that. May have very different methods, but we agree we should be able to do acupuncture in the way that we'd like to do it.
Yeah. And I think over and over, that's the commitment we come back to. We come back, whether we're an educator, a practitioner, a student, or whatever, we come back to what's our ground? Where's the place when we get quiet that we're committed to moving forward to in our life? And for whatever reason, the people that have chosen this place, they find that. And it was always incredible to watch the students proceed through adversity, to watch the faculty proceed through the adversities they face from students and administration, to watch administrators that face adversity from regulators and students, to the regulators that face, everyone just kept at it. And that is, to me, the remarkable gift of this profession. The issue of standards became a prominent one in the late 90s because it supported the bigger schools, really. There also became, along with it, a big school versus small school division, because the big schools got involved with research. They had the resources for facilities, the resources to look really good and often be considered the best schools in the country. But when you looked and visited with their graduates or with their faculty, their outcomes and the morale was often really abysmal, because mass production of acupuncture students doesn't work that well. You need a lot of quality hands-on care. But for the accrediting body, and to some degree for the council of colleges, the presidents, the bigger schools had more priority and more belief. So if you were from a big school and the site visitors went to you, they would kind of whitewash you. But if you were a little school, they would tear you apart if they could. So this became a struggle that many of us got involved with, to find ways that the little schools could find their own creative niche to do what they wanted to do and still meet the standard. And so there had to be a bit of, how do you show you meet a standard when you don't meet the standard? Meaning you don't have a separation of power in the same way that higher education defines it, yet your outcomes, your budget, your morale, your national exam results, all are superb. And so that was one of the things that our little school faced and a bunch of other schools did. If you're a Worsley school, how do you face it when you're teaching mainly 5-element acupuncture? It doesn't meet their particular curriculum standards. And so we had to find innovative ways to work this through. So it was and sometimes there were outright battles within the council between the big colleges and the little ones, because resources were often going more to what the big colleges wanted than to what the little colleges needed. So there was that sort of struggle as well. But again, Michael, my main focus was in education. So you're history taking, I'm kind of a nerd here. I'm not really, I can talk educational policy development for hours, but I'm not sure that's what your listeners want to hear about.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner, because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi, and that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
Well, it's funny. In a way, I don't care what the listeners want to hear about. I care that they hear something interesting. I kind of follow my own nose with this. And when it comes to something, broadly speaking, history of the emergence of Chinese medicine into the mainstream society, it's multifaceted. So of course you've got things like standards and all those struggles. You got things like curriculum development. You've got just the culture changing, becoming more open to things. It's many, many facets. So really what I'm interested in is the whole damn thing, the whole sandwich. And I mean, teaching Chinese medicine, look, that was something you got interested in very early. It's a weird thing to teach because you got to teach people to think in ways and perceive in ways that they're not used to thinking and perceiving. That's a rough go, in part because all these structures of who we think we are and how competent we are and what kind of person we are, you go to Chinese medicine school and start to rethink reality, you are literally learning to rethink reality. I think it kind of messes people up a bit. Did you notice that?
Oh, for sure. I mean, acupuncture school has just about every button that could be pushed in a person at different times. For some people, it's the academics. For some, it's touching a patient. For some, it's not getting results with the patient. For some, so it isn't just academic. It's also how you are in the moment as well. And so people go, we would see people freaking out all through the program at different times and in different ways. One of the biggest struggles for a lot of people was how to not follow snap judgments. I mean, case-based diagnosis in medical education is recognized as being one of the main ways to diagnose a patient. If you've seen enough patients, you hear some information, you quickly go, oh, that's like this other people, that's this. The problem with that method is that sometimes you jump before you have enough information to realize a difference. So example, we had a woman who came in with headaches. It started when she got married. So everyone jumped on, oh, she has liver qi stagnation, gallbladder channel blockage because she got married and she, it's not working or whatever, and she feels trapped. I mean, that was And they treated her based on that for over a year. And she got a little better with her headache, but not enough to really justify continuing a lot of liver treatments when she was still having headaches. So we dug deeper into the history of this patient and discovered that the other thing that occurred when she got married was her husband and her had agreed to not have sex until they got married. And then they also agreed that they didn't want to have children right away. And so therefore, she started taking the birth control pill when she got married. And when we heard that, we looked the birth control pill up, side effect headache. She went to the doctor. She changed the med. The headaches disappeared. So that kind of thing we face all the time in diagnosis and treatment. Yes?
Paul, I'm laughing because the first-year students at SIOM started that case. A second-year students came along somewhere in that just before we figured out it was the pill. I was in on that. I remember that. And it was a really humbling damn moment because, like, what's the best thing for this patient? Not acupuncture. Oh, you just need a different birth control pill. That really taught me something about being present to what it is that a patient needs. Sometimes it's what I have. Sometimes it's what I have to offer. Sometimes it's what someone else has to offer. And being able to make that distinction and have that clarity, send people to where they need to go to get the help. That was a really instructive moment. I remember that. It's funny you should bring it up. But that was one of the pivotal moments in my education that I think about all the time in my current work. It's gone with me for 25 years. Isn't that funny?
Synchronized, yes. So that is funny that you were there. So that sort of story happened a lot. And if you didn't have people on the ball with it all, it could go on and on and on. And there are a lot of stories of where things weren't caught. So so there are real challenges in education and the need for close supervision. And the challenge, I remember the group I told you about that harassed me without even knowing who I was, other than I was an old white man that was head of a school. Most of them graduated from a large college that is considered one of the best in the country. And yet they felt completely unprepared for clinical practice. And they got furious because of all the money they had spent. And they banded together. They literally banded together to form an organization to try to find another way. And so, this to practice and be successful. This was the community acupuncture movement. Remember them?
Well, they're still around. And look, one of the things that I love about people that do acupuncture, we can be really damn creative and very entrepreneurial. So, when I hear about some guy that creates a school, like, hooray, let's hear it for entrepreneurs that put some skin in the game and make something. You look at community acupuncture, man, that's a powerful brand. Talk about entrepreneurship. It's great.
And it was birthed out of incredible.
And there's a place for it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's great. I mean, there's always been group acupuncture around, but to make it into the model that was successful, both business and patient wise, in terms of funding for people, that didn't have to pay as much money, it was wonderful. But it came out of rage. And it's interesting to see the number of things in our profession, if you look back at their origins, that, if these graduates had been successful practitioners out of their school, they would have never had the initiative to form this. So maybe we should say thank you to the big college.
Well, I think we should. Well, look, I think one of the things that drives human beings, and this circles back to my first question that started us off. You're a young person. What does life look like around you? What are the problems that you're facing? Because look, you get born into this world. We didn't ask for it. Somebody else made the world. Most of us aren't that happy with it, especially as we get a little bit older and notice how shit works. But that's also the impetus to do something that might be helpful. And if it wasn't for that capacity to look at, here's something that I think is broken, or it doesn't work, or it's causing a lot of suffering and problems. And then you look at that and then you aim yourself at making it better. That's a damn good way to go through life.
That's very good.
You can make some money too when you help people.
Yeah, that's very good. And I think when you look at the history of our profession, you see many moments like that. Listening to your words and listening to the places where we or someone felt something was broken and not working well, and then they to fix it, that made a real difference often in wonderful ways. Sometimes not in wonderful ways, but it was still.
But sometimes not. We're dealing with the wood element, and the wood element can be destructive as hell. It can also be really creative.
Yes, indeed. Very good. So I've got to, given our time, and I'm not sure what our time is, but there's one last struggle that has been going on throughout the history of this profession that, and I haven't been around for the last decade, so I don't know how significant it's become, but the way you introduced this talk makes me think there's still a foothold. And that is the question of whether we need qi or not. In other words, there are those that profoundly experience and believe that qi is fundamental to treatment, to diagnosis, to relationship. It is the cosmos. There are others that think it's an antiquated concept that really is code for not knowing what the fuck to do. And we need just to rely on the medical standards and medical vocabulary and not even bring any of that energetic stuff into it so that we can match into the insurance companies, to the FDA, and all the other systems and access here so that we can get the funding and the support that we need. And the thing holding us back is we have this kind of secret qi. When you look at the regulatory language from ACOM and from the council, I think the word is mentioned once or twice in pages and pages of curriculum. So the organizational bodies are literally covering it up. And then you have presidents of colleges speaking out. We don't, drop it. We have some schools that have dropped it, but then we have others that have been a voice for qi. But then how do you train people to experience and practice with qi when they touch, when they feel the pulse, when they insert a needle, when they're with the patient in a grounded way, all of which to me are qi-based kind of practices. You don't have to call it qi, for sure. You could just talk about grounding and having a friendly connection with the person and kneeling with intent. I did a whole podcast series where I didn't even use the word qi to speak of, even though it was all about qi. But that has been an uncomfortable dividing force throughout the conversations through the decades.
There's a book called, I think it's called The Beginning of Everything. Are you familiar with it?
No.
It's a big, long book. I'm only partway through it. It's a long one. I think it's called The Beginning of Time, or The Beginning of Everything. And it's a little bit like Sapiens in a way that we were talking about earlier, that human beings, we tend to have this thing that we do of those of us on this side of the river, we do it like this, not like those bozos on the other side of the river who do it like that. And there's a term for it, it's called schismogenesis, where there's this tendency we have to create someone who's different, to create the other. Well, I'm like this, and how do I know that I'm this? Because I'm not that. And so I think this is a very natural aspect that our profession would go through, that there are folks who come down on the side of qi, presence, all of that, everything that's included in that. And then there's those who will come down on the side of this is measurable and this is analytic and this is air quotes medical, whatever. I suspect there's room for all of it.
Well, certainly the history of medicine from Hippocrates on forward in the Western medicine has this debate between nature and, cure, between benefit and do no harm. You look at various eras of the history of medicine, and it's between the natural, trust the body, and those we need to intervene more. And it often takes this role of the trust the body is trust the mysterious life force. And it's been given different names at different eras in history. And this is true in Chinese history as well. But the point being that this is something that some people want certainty more so, and they see maybe a more Newtonian perspective of the world where there are rules and laws you can follow. And others are tuned into the more, maybe what we call the quantum realm, because you certainly can get there in your consciousness. And they feel that mystery, they feel that life force, and somehow they have experienced that this is important for health and well-being as well. And of course, they're just two sides of the hemispheres that should get along. But like you said, there's sometimes a tendency to separate 5-element from TCM and chi from standards and big from little, and all, when we need all of it to work together. And so but maybe the breakups are what also generate the in order to make something new too. So I don't want to dictate that we all need to work together all the time, because that sounds a little too sweet. It's not the reality, for sure.
It's not the reality for sure. And I think that's often where innovation comes from. You look at something and go, not that. I want something different. And you look around, it's like, I don't see what I'm looking for. Oh, maybe it's up to me to fix it, create it, have a shot at it. Like, take your vision for it and go. I really appreciate this conversation. I keep coming back to this in my mind, that there is a common denominator. There's that low place where the water gathers that connects all of us, if you want to sound all fancy and, Wuxing about it, or Taoist, or whatever, whatever label you want to put on. But there's that place where we connect. There's a place where we're similar. Sure, there's our differences, but yeah, that maybe that we need to have both of them, right? You need that base, and then you need the thing that's the very unique expression. Unique expressions tend to get in fistfights with each other.
Yeah. Peter Senge wrote a book called Presence. And in that, I remember a little story that I always come back to because it matches my experience with patient care, with an individual patient, but also with group dynamics. And it was a group of people that got together in Guatemala after major civil war, and it was the rebels and the priests and the government, all the people that had hated and killed each other. They said they all got tired, and they all gathered around a table and hired a professional to come in to try to develop some way to do peacekeeping there. And everyone was in their own position, like you said. You did this, you killed them, you did this. And then they got around the second day, and the facilitator thought, this is hopeless, because everyone's got their position. And they got to this one refugee worker who had been sitting there quietly. And the guy told a story where he walked up into the mountains, and he saw people burying in a mass grave some people, and he saw a little mass of tiny, tiny bones. It was a little hill of tiny bones, just, a mound. And he asked me, well, what are these? And the person that was there digging said, these are all the bones of the fetuses, the unborn children that also died. And when this gentleman told that story, the whole place just got silent. And according to the facilitator, it was just quiet for a little bit, and then everyone started finding a way together, that common ground, that place where the water, and they were able to work something out. And so his book describes this as the bottom of the U, that the front of the U is where everyone going, and then you get to it. If you can get to that place, and you can't always, and he actually believes you need some kind of spiritual practice, whatever it is, to help you get to that place. When you get to that common spot of feeling where everything just gets quiet and connected, then the other side of the U is how you make the plans together that are free largely of the individual egos, or whatever you want to call it, individual perspectives, and create something new. Emergence, in other words. That really, I think, could be a definition for emergence, where we all start flying together. A remarkable little story that every time I think of it, I start to get a little tear, because I get tears also, sometimes. Yeah.
It seems to me that if Chinese medicine is real, if the theories and the practices and the methods are true, then we should be able to take what we do in clinic and apply it in other places of our lives, our families, our conflicts with other people, world situations. Pick the one that's got your attention. And I appreciate your reflection on this because, and it comes back around to Qi for me, that there's a place, if you can get to it, and we all know this as acupuncturists, because we work with people all the time. We walk back into that room and it's different. It's still, it's quiet. It's got a whole different feeling to it.
Yeah.
And you're describing a process of people that have been in conflict, horrible social strife. We're living in a moment like that. What's the Qi that settles and connects? That's a principle of the work that we do. Maybe we can take it out into the world. I really appreciate you bringing this up. That's very powerful. For me, really lands.
Yes, I am with you. I call it Qi transformation, a moment of Qi transformation. I think we need to take the words, when you talked about truth, when you talked about Chinese medicine being true, to me, it can only be true for you or me as an individual if we have a deep, direct experience of it. That truth is a personal experience of Qi transformation, of Yuan Qi, of wood, of fire. It can certainly occur in relationship with patients and so forth, but it has to not just be us thinking about the definition of Qi transformation. It has to be where in our whole body, we can feel that experience where everything turns and there is a stillness for a moment and a power that occurs. And how to, and as I said earlier, the medicine itself develops that practice. Even if our minds are off thinking about the rent, if we keep doing the medicine, I truly have faith in that connection to deepen our awareness. If we, open up a little bit, and most people have things in life that cause them to open up at some point. So I trust life to give us that. But I do, yes, I think that is the biggest question in education to me. And, the one that prompted this series of podcasts that no one really listened to that I did, but they were my most recent answer to that question, which is how do we help people experience in their full being the connection with everything around them and with each person and with each tree and with each needle and so forth in a deeper way. That is Qi. So thank you for that. That moment. It's let's do it.
Well, I think this is probably no pun intended, maybe a little pun intended. Good place to put a pin in it for today.
Very good.
Thank you so much for your time today. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for being a rich white man school owner. I appreciate the education that I got where I went to school. It gave me a foundation for the past 25 years of my life. It's been a pretty good ride.
You are welcome. I will only correct one little statement, one little adjective, and that is after 3 years out in practice, you are making more money a year than I made in my whole career there. But aside from that, it's rich in the amazing watching of graduates go out like you and do wonderful things. Without that, there would have been no value or worth to keep doing it. So I want to thank you because it's the people like you that I dreamed if we did this could go out and make a real difference. And you are certainly one of them that's doing it. So back at you.
All right, Paul. Until next time then.
Okay. Bye-bye.
I went to SIOM before it was an accredited school. I thought the program and approach was a good fit for how I learned, and being in my late 30s at the time, I did not have the patience for a program that would not let me get my hands on people for a year or more. At SIOM, they had us in the clinic from the first week. Our patients were part of the curriculum. That fit the way that I learned. And at the beginning, I was not even sure that I'd finished the schooling. While I'd interviewed some practicing acupuncturists as a way to see if it's possible to even make a middle-class living at the trade, I wasn't sure if acupuncture was something I wanted to pursue beyond getting a sense of how it worked. I was not at all sure if I'd actually caught into the practice. Turns out, I'm still working out how it works, and it's been a good ride as a livelihood as well. I think I got lucky. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.